You're listening to the Zoe Turner podcast, business and mindset conversations that will help you move from fear and uncertainty to development and growth so that you can crush both life and business. Please welcome your host, Zoe Turner.
Thank you all for tuning in. My next guest is Alex Chisnall. Alex is the host of the #1 Apple podcast, Screw It, Just Do It. And he's also the founder of a Facebook group called Podpreneur. It's a group to help entrepreneurs create, launch, and monetize a successful podcast. So if you're a business owner or an individual with a message or a story to share, and you've been thinking about procrastinating and starting your own podcast, but you're not sure where to start, then this live stream might just have some of the answers for you to help you get started on your podcasting journey. Welcome to the podcast, Alex. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. We are streaming live on Facebook, we're streaming live on YouTube, and of course it's also going to be uploaded as a podcast, and it will be available on all the regular podcasting platforms. If you guys are enjoying these lives and you'd like to hear more of them, please like my page and share to your audience. Without further ado, let's get into this, Alex. We're going to talk all about podcasting, the benefits of podcasting for your brand, what it can do to elevate your brand. The popularity of podcasts is continuing to grow. Do you think it's too late for people to get involved?
No, the fact that there's now 1 million podcasts, literally Apple announced on April the 20th that we'd hit 1 million podcasts listed on Apple. For me, it's still really early doors in podcasting. There's over a billion active users in YouTube. There's over 20 million active blogs and over 1 billion blogs that have ever existed. So for me, the written word, video, audio, for me, audio is still really young when it comes to podcasting. And just the fact that yesterday Joe Rogan signed an exclusive deal with Spotify for $100 million to have his show exclusively on Spotify shows me that there's a lot of growth still to come. The fact that big tech companies like Spotify, Apple, Google getting involved, it's a super interesting space, and it's not too late. Like anything, I think that the best time to start a podcast was yesterday. The second best time is going to be today.
I've got some stats here. Spotify is likely to outdo its competitor Apple in the popularity game, as only 20% of the millennials and Generation Z population listen to Apple Music, while 46% of them listen to Spotify. This is according to a study by the podcast host.
That's interesting, isn't it? What I've heard like the last few months, like traditionally Apple always owned 50% plus of the market, but now it's been dropping down into the 40s as Spotify literally takes over more of the market. And last year they spent over $500 million on buying podcast companies. They bought their own platform in Anchor where you can host your own podcast. They bought a load of production companies. So Spotify very much getting exclusive content, and it's kind of a no-brainer from their point of view. If they had people on their platform, Spotify, listening to music, and they wanted to watch a podcast before, they would have to leave Spotify's platform to go to Apple or Amazon, etc. So to make a big play like that and buy a load of exclusive content to keep people on their platform. And it used to have to. I got an invite from Spotify. I remember 2 years ago, whatever, they were in beta testing mode. You had to get an invite from Spotify to be on their platform, and they were clearly, testing things out, seeing what worked. And I heard some stat that it was only like 5% of the world's podcasts were on Spotify, and then they opened it up for everybody last year. And then now, they clearly spent that time researching things. And yeah, you're right. The fact that Gen Z, which is the biggest listening demographic of podcasts, something like 40% of Gen Z listen to podcasts, bigger than any other demographic, 18 to 29-year-olds, I think that covers, doesn't it? that's the next generation. And the fact that for me, all new cars are being built with the technology to listen to podcasts in the car. Once we all start moving again throughout the world and start commuting, I think, more podcasts are going to be consumed. People are going to listen to podcasts rather than listen to radio in their car, etc. And the fact you don't have to look at a screen, you can just listen is massive for me, and it's all done through, one of these things. It's revolutionized it.
Yeah, it's incredible. The world is definitely changing. I remember once upon a time when you wanted to talk to someone, you'd pick up the phone. And now people just don't even make phone calls. It's texting. And I never thought I would become one of those people, but I think I am becoming one of those people. The beauty of podcasting is that, like you say, you can listen to them when you're driving, you can listen to them when you're running, when you're walking. So in this day and age where so many type A personalities about, and we like to be active, we like to be doing things, podcasting is something that can accompany those activities, and it's just becoming more and more popular. I've got another stat here for you from TechCrunch. Mm-hmm. There will be a 27% increase in podcast production, which is equivalent to 29 million episodes in 2020. So wow. That is absolutely huge. That figure in itself proves that it's not too late to get on the bandwagon. It's still very much an evolving kind of market. However, there is going to be a lot more competition. And I think in order to stay ahead and to stand out, everyone needs to be upping the game a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I still think, and the fact that last year, and I think it was probably a reaction to Spotify, spending $500 million, Apple decided to shake up the categories in the podcast chart. So, whereas before you would have, for example, business as a broad category, and underneath that there would be management and marketing, they split up a bunch of categories. So you had management as a separate category, marketing as a separate category, entrepreneurship, business news, social enterprise, investing. So for me, that was just showing again that there was more opportunity for everyone to make a splash when they did launch their podcast. There were new categories for people to be found in, right across the board. And yes, certain categories are always going to be super popular, like, business, comedy, I think like sports, those categories are super popular. But by creating these subcategories, it makes it more popular, more opportunity, I should say, for everybody else to find their niche, and for me, that is key when you are starting out in podcasting, that you don't make, classic mistake that everybody does, which is, launch one episode in a really popular category, like business, for example. And then after, say, 7 episodes, which apparently is the number that most people never get past, you get disillusioned because you can't, see that you're making much progress with it, and you give up. But look, for me, when I launched, I had 2 downloads in week 1, not even day 1, the whole week in 7 days. I had 2 downloads, and yes, there have been times where I've thought to chuck it in because it is a commitment, and it's just for me when other things in my life take a higher priority. I was doing a lot of live events, but the reset that we've had at the moment, and 0 live events has taken my focus back to podcasts. And ever since I started helping other people with theirs, my own podcast has taken a little bit of a back seat, but I've used this time to try and, refocus again and find out what people love about my own show. And I'm still learning as well. Some of the people we've helped in the Podpreneur group, in their early 20s, I'm still learning from them, Gen Z, the tactics they're using to launch a podcast, things that I hadn't thought of before. So it's awesome. I love it. And I think there's still huge opportunity out there.
Yeah, there's something to learn every day, I think, in podcasting. I started recording back in 2018. I didn't actually upload it up to a podcast until beginning of 2019. But even now, I still feel very much a novice, and I feel that I've got so much to learn. And, for me, I just like to try and improve with every single episode. I'll watch my lives back. The whole live thing is new to me. I've only just started doing lives. And yeah, I'll just watch them back and I think, right, what can I do to improve on that the next time? So it's just, very small, simple little steps. Tell us a little bit about your podcast and how it all started for you.
Yeah, sure. So when I started, I started listening to podcasts, and my favorite podcast was a podcast called How I Built This, by a company called NPR. The host is a guy called Guy Raz, and I just remember I just got so passionate about it that every Monday morning when I woke up, it was literally the highlight was grabbing my phone, listening to that podcast as I was commuting to work. I would literally listen to some of it in the car and then finish the rest as I walked into work. And it was a business podcast, and it was this guy's basically interviewing super successful people, and they were all billionaires or multi-millionaires, who'd built successful companies. And it was listening to this, and at the time I was working with Virgin Startup, which is Sir Richard Branson's not-for-profit business helping entrepreneurs with funding and mentoring. So I was in that space anyway, and I'd started doing live events for them as well. So I'd been having entrepreneurs come and speak at my events and share their experience. And I just thought, there's an opportunity here to do something similar, and like anything, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. 99% of things, probably bar what Dyson is inventing all the time, has already been invented. So I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, but want to improve on something that was already there, because I thought, as much as I loved this, How I Built This podcast, a lot of the advice that was being given was from people who'd retired 20 years ago and hadn't been in business, hadn't been connected to their business since then. And I thought, well, some advice is timeless. The world has changed in the last 20 years, the advent of the likes of social media and all the other technology that comes with our phones, etc. And I just thought, if I could interview a different niche of people within that, so entrepreneurs who were more up and coming, that people might have heard of but didn't know the backstory. So it started by literally interviewing people who I've been working with at Virgin Startup, been having at my live events, and I've just built that up over time. And if you start by interviewing people who you're connected to locally, so like the bigger names in my town here in like Poole, Bournemouth and Dorset, I started off by interviewing them. Then I started interviewing nationally known entrepreneurs, the likes of, say, Holly Tucker from Not on the High Street. And then it was like international people like Lewis Howes from the School of Greatness, who'd just come off the Ellen Show and had like exploded in the States. So I've just kind of increased my network. I guess that's been the biggest benefit for me as well, is actually connecting with these people and having conversations, which for me it's been the equivalent of a Harvard MBA. I think like $250,000 a year that it would normally cost you to have access to these kind of people and to pick their brains on what makes them successful, how they've built successful brands. And it's interesting because once you do speak to a lot of these people and find what makes them different to the other 99% of us, there are commonalities amongst them. It's the reasons why they've been successful. And I just love sharing that with my audience. And over time, I've like you, I've developed my show. I've learned. I've then kind of found my own voice and started doing my own solo episodes on a Saturday. So now I do twice weekly, and then again, like you, I've embraced doing these live streams as a way to connect with people outside of normally person-to-person live events.
For business owners, thank you. For business owners wanting to get started on their podcasting journey, what would you say were the main benefits of having a podcast?
Yeah, great question. So for me, it's definitely been more than one thing. So it's been building my network, literally just connecting to amazing people. If someone had told me just 3 years ago that if I needed advice, I could pick up my phone and I could call an investor from Dragon's Den, a winner of The Apprentice, a handful of billionaires, multimillionaires, etc., who'd been super successful in business, then I would have said, how would I do that? My network was just local people to me. So that's been huge for me, and the fact that I can call people like that now my friends, and I literally message and communicate with on a weekly, if not daily basis with some of them, has been unbelievable. So for me, it's been the people. It's been the biggest part, and it's also enabled me to find my voice, I suppose, and articulate my thoughts, to grow, definitely be perceived as having some kind of influence in the podcasting space as a knowledgeable authority that people can turn to. So for me, those have been two of the biggest benefits: like the people, finding my voice, building some kind of authority and knowledge of a subject, outside of school, which finished many years ago for me, but to continue learning, like you mentioned, I'm continually learning in this, and I love it. I actually started out in radio at BBC Radio Wales in Cardiff some 30 years ago now, in the 90s, and I remember interviewing the likes of Lennox Lewis, who was heavyweight champion of the world at the time, and Neil Kinnock, who was leader of the opposition party to Margaret Thatcher. So that kind of shows you my age, but it kind of feels like I've kind of come full circle back into the audio space, but audio is now just called something different. It's podcasting. So I feel like I kind of come home in a way. It's funny. It's been really funny.
Yeah, and in many ways we're moving forward so much in terms of technology, but in other ways with podcasting, we're kind of going back to the very traditional, very much like radio, isn't it? It's like another aspect of radio.
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. It's literally like going back. It feels, even though with the technology and the phone has revolutionized it, because podcasting started in around 2004, but it wasn't a big deal. It had a growth spurt, disappeared for probably 12, 13 years before most people started becoming aware of it again, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And podcasting's doubled, in the last 5 years. But for me, it's going back to those, ancient roots, really, of storytelling. Literally, that's what we're doing. And even when I'm working with, a $300 million brand, like I have been in creating podcasts for other people, we're still just telling stories. We're telling stories about how that person founded that brand, how they developed this product or this service, and why their customers love it so much. So I think, whilst podcasting might not be for everyone, some people prefer the written word, some people prefer, this, like video communication. I find it a really easy medium with really low barriers to entry for people to actually enter. Video can end up being really expensive, and podcast, the technology is perceived to be expensive. But again, you can literally start with nothing, just your phone and the free apps and the technology that comes with it. So I think that's what's been a great enabler, and especially in the last 8 weeks during this pandemic, is that it's really lowered the bar for everybody to let them in and experience this technology. Because whereas before people were hiring out podcast studios and spending a couple of £100 an hour doing that, and then the production and editing that comes with it, people have literally just been interviewing each other on Zoom for free, and recording that conversation. So and editing it themselves on something like Anchor, the Spotify platform, which is free.
Yeah. Literally anyone can set up their own podcast. Like you say, you don't need all of this fancy equipment. You can literally do it with your phone, lapel microphone, or your laptop on Zoom. There's really no excuse. If anyone out there is listening to this and you've been procrastinating about starting your podcast, or you've just been putting it off and you'd really like to get moving on it, maybe you don't have the funds to invest in it, you just get yourself onto Amazon, buy a lapel microphone. Most people these days do have a smartphone. One thing I'm interested in, Alex, I'm very new to the podcasting game. I still very much feel like a newbie and a beginner, and I'm learning all the time. What does it take to have a #1 Apple podcast? Let me just ask you one more thing here. Is it like Amazon? It's very easy to manipulate, like we all know that if you write a book, it's very easy to manipulate to be an Amazon bestseller. Sometimes we just have to put ourselves into an obscure category that no one else is. Is it like that with iTunes? Is that how you can be very quickly elevate you to a #1 podcast, or is it pure hard graft?
It's a really good question, and yeah, I don't fully understand Amazon, and I've heard more about that kind of stuff just through a couple of local connections. And I've how has she got a number one bestseller on Amazon? And then, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
But
you put your book in something really obscure like basket weaving or something like that. Then there's other things that you can do, like you can get a group, on launch date. There's a certain amount of time that you have to be able to, I think, buy the book within this time period.
Right.
So, you can pre-sell your book. And then you can also get a large supportive network, a group of people that agree to buy your book on launch day. All these little things elevate it to a bestseller. It's very easy to manipulate.
I'm going to go for Bavarian basket weaving, I think, when I launch my book. Get super niche.
Oh my God, you'll be straight in there.
No, honestly, I wish I knew, when I launched my own podcast, I wish I knew what I know now, because yes, there are tips, tactics, strategies that can definitely help, but I don't think they'll get you a number one. They can definitely get you a top 50, a top 20, maybe even a top 10 podcast. Like one of my students from my podcast course recently landed in 6 days. He got to number 10, 6 days after launch. And he literally, Scott, followed every single piece of advice that I gave him. And he was just like hungry every day for wanting, more advice. But again, he worked his ass off to do that. And likewise myself, I did it the wrong way round and the long way round, just because I didn't have the knowledge at the time. I had 2 years of treading water with my podcast, really. And then, like anything in life, I suppose, and you'll know this, I decided to make it my focus, my number one goal, in January 2019, when I was writing my roadmap for the year, which is something that I do. It's like 100 questions covering like all 8 areas of my life. And I decided to make that my focus, to get a number one ranked podcast. And the reasons for that weren't pure vanity. They were that I decided to go all in on podcasting, that I wanted to help other people.
How did you do that? Sharing it, how were you getting it seen? Were you having set days when you were releasing a podcast? Were you putting a podcast out every 2 days, every week?
No, literally, well, every week, and then I elevated it to twice a week. So that's going to have help for a start. You're going to get more downloads. But the way the algorithm works on for podcasts, as we understand it, is that this is why there's an opportunity for anybody who's new to make a splash, get their podcast found in a chart, which for me, gets you more visibility, which gets you more ears listening to your podcast. And that is, number of new subscribers, number of new downloads, and number of new ratings and reviews. So, with that in mind, that's the reason why, I looked this week and my podcast was, I think it was number 13 in Egypt. And there was like Gary V at number 11 and Tim Ferriss at number 15. And I thought, again, if someone had told me 3 years ago that I could get my podcast in an African country along 2 of my biggest heroes, I would take it. But to be honest with you, it has been just perseverance, like anything in life, whether it's running or whether it's podcasting. I just made it my focus, and I, every week spent that time. And I had a number twos, and I just couldn't get a number one. And I actually, in my mind, I'd say 99% decided that it just wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't going to happen. I just couldn't get beyond, this number one podcast, which every week it was the Daily Telegraph newspaper was always ahead of me. And I just thought, hey, I haven't got the resources they've got. I'm never going to have, those kind of resources of a national newspaper that could probably, drive a load of paid ads to promote their podcast. But what I found that helps, and people think, common misconception again, is if you get a bunch of big name interviewees on your podcast, that is a guarantee to get a number one. But what I found was it's not, because they don't have the time to actually help you promote it. The likes of a Richard Reed from Innocent, or the likes of a Ray Kelvin from Ted Baker, global businesses, billion-pound businesses. And yes, I love the fact that I managed to get them for an interview, but they didn't share it. They didn't share it with their followers.
I found that too. I've had a couple of quite high-profile guests on my podcast, exactly the same. They didn't share it with their audience. Even though I asked them to, they didn't. Some of my podcasts that are the most listened to have completely and utterly surprised me 100%, because it's been the less well-known people, but it's been the ones that are really willing to talk about it, share it with their network, and it doesn't matter how many followers your guest has, how many followers on Instagram they have, how many followers on Facebook, how many stages they've spoken on over the world. None of this really matters. Sometimes all it takes is have a guest on who's got quite a small dedicated following, and they're willing to share that with their network.
Yeah, for me, it was the one that did it was Huel, which for those who don't know is like a powdered meal replacement. And Julian Hearn is very active on LinkedIn, really, really active on LinkedIn. Even though they're relatively small and a super engaged community, which is exactly, what you said, and called Hooligans. And, where everybody who buys, a bag of Huel for their meal replacement powder gets a t-shirt. And, very much that kind of community tribal thing where, you just see people all over the world taking selfies with a t-shirt on. So he knew if he put it out there and he did like a dedicated LinkedIn post, which gets, hundreds of comments, thousands of likes, that was the one that tipped it over the edge from a number 2 to a number 1. And another one, which, does show you to a certain degree that the power of influencer marketing, again, that it can work, was I had a bit of momentum after that. And it was only maybe a couple of weeks after that I had James Haskell, who just retired as an England rugby player, British Lion, and he was just making the decision at the time to go into I'm a Celebrity, get me out of here. But it was before he went into the jungle. And I did a podcast with him, and it was still to this day the funniest podcast that I've ever done in my life. I don't think in 3 years I'd ever had anybody swear on my podcast, yet literally 0.3 seconds in, there were F-bombs left, right and centre. And I was going to edit it within an inch of its life. But in the end, I just thought, you know what, let's just roll with it. He's a rugby player. He's used to those conversations in the changing room. So anyway, we released it, and he promoted it on his business page, which is like a fitness page with maybe, I don't know, 90,000 people on it maybe. And we got it to number 2 again. Here we go again, I thought. And then I saw him just scrolling through Instagram, and I saw him live on there DJing at somebody's, at some events, because that's what he was doing as well, DJing. And I just thought, shall I ask him again? Is it cheeky to, kind of give him a nudge again? I just thought, sod it, what have I got to lose? I might never see him again for the rest of my life, but I've had him on the show. So I literally sent him a text message, said, Hask, don't suppose there's any chance you could share this on your personal pages there? And he had, I don't know whether it was 1 million followers or hundreds of thousands on there. And his wife, Chloe, she's a fitness influencer. She's the daughter of Richard and Judy, daytime TV host. So,
yeah.
Yeah, so I was messaging them both, and literally within 4 hours, he posted it on there, and just saw it go, impressions go right up, and it went to number 1 literally within 4 hours. So there are different ways to do it, but like you said, it's getting somebody you make it easy for them to share as well. That's what I think is key as well. You give them the assets that they can actually share it for them. You write the post for them. You put the link for them. All those things, and don't be afraid. As I've learned now, to go back and ask people, because you're giving them a platform at the end of the day. You're promoting who they are, and it's very much now. I get hit up by PR agencies 5 or 6 times a day asking me to have their guests on the show. And they put those out there to different podcasts, the same as they would, here's an opportunity for the Daily Mail, here's an opportunity for the Daily Telegraph, and here's these podcasts that you can go on. So it's an opportunity for them. So don't be afraid to actually, push them to promote it.
You've made it your mission, Alex, to help entrepreneurs themselves launch their own podcast. Tell us a little bit about your group, Podpreneur.
Yeah, again, and I think a lot of things are going to be traced back to this time, the lockdown, the pandemic. A lot of things are going to be traced back to this time. And, one of the things that came out of this for me was just seeing other people doing things, helping people. And I just thought, what can I do? I just make podcasts for people, for different brands. What can I do? And I just thought, actually, there's going to be a lot of people with a lot of extra time on their hands at this time. And I saw that podcasting downloads were going up. More people were listening to podcasts because people were at home. So what I could do was literally start, a free group and do free live trainings in there. Weekly content, sharing, a lot of the tactics and strategies just to get people started. Really, again, it's like yourself and like everybody, my time is my most valuable asset. So if I can give X amount of time into that group every week, I hope, that it generates momentum, that people help each other. And I've seen that happening in there already, people offering each other advice, because everybody's learning, everybody's at, different stages, whether they're, procrastinating, which I did a poll and that was the biggest stage that people are at still, is procrastinating. But we've had, every week somebody has launched a podcast. I think last week 3 people launched a brand new podcast, and one of them, good friend of mine, Chris Wright, launched a golf podcast. He got to, I think, number 2 in the second day of launching his podcast, which is amazing traction,
Amazing. Yeah, that's incredible. I think when you've got such a niche like that, a good friend of mine, Adrian Kerr, he has his own podcast, Kitesurfers 365. His podcast is absolutely huge.
Is it?
And the downloads that he gets, like literally within the first hour, he did tell me the stat. I can't remember what it was, but he's just doing so incredibly well, but he's got such a very tight niche. So I think if there's anybody out there specialize in something like golf or like tennis or something like that, horse riding, there's people out there that really want to listen.
Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine, Trevor Jenkins, he'd been talking about launching a podcast, like a lot of people, for a long time. And this time, the pandemic, getting him into the Facebook group just gave him the nudge to get it done. So he launched his podcast maybe 4 weeks ago now, which is called Not Just Crew, which again, as you say, is completely niche. It's for cabin crew of airlines. Now, it's a very emotive subject at the moment. All the airlines are making people redundancy. They're going through, they're cutting, most of them seem to be, 35% of their staff are going to be made redundant. So Not Just Crew is a podcast for cabin crew, past and present, shining a light on the different jobs, careers that they do alongside that, and that they've gone on to do as well. So, this is a great example. We did a live episode. He's asked me to co-host it. So we did a live episode on Tuesday, which is 48 hours ago now, less than 48 hours ago. And it so far has had, we did it live in his Facebook group. Within 48 hours, it had 800 people had watched the live episode, which is nuts. 800 people had watched that. Previous week, 600 people had watched that episode, which was with a cabin crew member who is training to be a doctor at the moment, volunteering, at the moment in an NHS hospital as well, while she's, on, they'd all been put on like 2 months unpaid leave at Virgin. She's a Virgin Atlantic cabin crew member. So, something like that, again, is super niche, very emotive subject for people. I mean, people regard being cabin crew as, their dream job. They get to travel, they get to meet amazing people, get to hang out, in amazing hotels. I think it's an amazing subject. So again, another, example, like you say, just definitely finding those niches like kite surfing, like cabin crew, like golf. There's scope for everybody out there for sure.
Go check out Alex's group, Podpreneur. It might just give you the impetus to actually get your podcast started and get it up and running. Alex, you've given some great value today. Fantastic value. Thank you so much for being a guest. I really appreciate having you on. Fascinating. Just get it done. Just get it started, because there is a window of opportunity right here and right now, and you don't want to miss that, because it's relatively low costing at the moment. There might come a time when that's not going to be the case. I don't know. So
yeah, no, appreciate you having me on. Really appreciate it. Great hanging out with you here, and love how you've got your StreamYard page. I'm taking notes. I'm learning from this as well. Looks incredibly professional. Far
Thank
better
you.
than our one in Not Just Crew. We need to improve this, Simon, because I can see he's watching in the Podpreneur group. So yeah,
Okay.
well done you. Well done you.
Thank you so much.